All right, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into what is honestly one of the most chilling mysteries buried deep in the archives. You see, for 10,000 years, the Imperium has basically believed that the galaxy has a hard edge, a final boundary, a place where the stars just kind of thin out into total darkness, where Imperial cartographers finally stop drawing lines, and where the light of the astronomicon becomes incredibly distant. But what if the edge of the galaxy was actually never empty? What if the first Imperial vessels to cross that line didn't discover a new civilization, but instead discovered that something had already noticed them? Just take a look at the surviving records we've got here. This whole thing begins with a fleet that, officially speaking, never existed. Sometime during the 41st millennium, its entire designation was purged. The commanders declared missing. The astropathic logs were completely sealed. They even went so far as to order the worlds that supplied the ships to forget the expedition had ever departed. But as always, fragments survived. A damaged transmission here, 3 navigational coordinates there, and one specific sentence that was repeated across 6 different astropathic reports. We are not alone beyond the rim. Now, it's important to note this wasn't some grand crusade or an invasion. It was purely a reconnaissance mission, and you really have to remember the context of the era. In the 41st millennium, the galaxy is already absolutely packed with threats. You've got Tyranids approaching from the outside, awakening Necrons, endless orc wars, chaos infecting entire sectors. It's a mess. The Galactic Rim was one of the very few places where Imperial intelligence was totally blind, so their objective was incredibly simple. Cross over, map the area, identify any threats, and come right back. No conquest, no prolonged engagements, and most importantly, do not make contact unless absolutely necessary. Keep that final instruction in mind because it's going to become extremely important later. Okay, let's dive into the actual setup. The fleet consisted of long-range vessel supported by a standard complement of escorts and astropaths. But as you can see here, distance was essentially their greatest advantage, but also their greatest weakness. Every single light year they traveled separated them further from any hope of Imperial reinforcement. If they had a damaged engine, it couldn't be replaced. Lose an escort, it's gone forever. If communications failed, command back home would literally have no idea what happened to them. But at first, nothing happened. They mapped dead worlds and freezing asteroids. There were no enemy fleets, no ancient empires. In fact, for a few weeks, the commander actually thought this whole thing was just going to end up as a boring bureaucratic success. But then the astropath started picking something up. It wasn't voices, it wasn't screams, and it wasn't the familiar madness of the warp either. It was a pattern. 3 pulses, then silence. 3 pulses, then silence, happening exactly every 17 hours. Now, what's so fascinating here is the massive debate this sparked among the crew. The official assumptions were pretty straightforward. Maybe it's a malfunctioning beacon or perhaps some old Xenos navigation system. But the unspoken reality, well, if the signal was artificial, someone or something had to be transmitting it. So what do? Continuing onward technically violates their core mission parameters, but just ignoring an unidentified transmission out beyond the frontier. That seems strategically irresponsible, so the commander chose curiosity. The fleet moved closer to investigate, and that is exactly when the signal changed. It stopped repeating. Instead, it answered. For several long seconds, absolutely nobody on the bridge understood what they were looking at, because that signal, it wasn't ahead of them anymore. It was directly behind them. The fleet hadn't detected another vessel approaching at all. There was no warp emergence, no engine flare, literally nothing. Something had simply appeared on their sensors right at their backs. And then, just as suddenly as it arrived, the signal vanished entirely. The commander frantically ordered the fleet to turn around, but there was nothing there. This instantly created a nightmare tactical scenario. Look at the breakdown we have here. The Imperium knows exactly how to fight an enemy it can actually see, but this. In Phase 1, they form up defensively. Escorts move out. All weapons are put on standby. In Phase 2, the aspect's data goes absolutely wild. One sensor reads a battleship-sized mass, while another reads completely empty space. And then in Phase 3, a survey ship just vanishes. No explosion, no frantic distress call, no debris left behind. One moment it's there on the scanners, the next it's just gone. That's when it clicked. They finally understood. They weren't the ones investigating an unknown signal anymore. They were the ones being investigated. The commander immediately ordered a full withdrawal. But as we see here, the route home was no longer safe. Their previous warp calculations were completely stable, but the current ones totally unreliable. And that difference is huge. Sure, they could still try to enter the warp, but a miscalculation of even a few light years could strand the entire expedition in deep space. Worse still, they realized something was now actively interfering with their astropathic communications. And then came the second transmission, just 4 words. "You have been seen." The bridge went completely dead silent because this message didn't come through the astropathic network. It bypassed absolutely everything and arrived straight through the fleet's ordinary local communication systems from an impossible distance. The commander ordered the message destroyed immediately, but instead it appeared on every single ship, every terminal, every internal display. It even showed up on systems that were physically unplugged from the network. "You have been seen." Just imagine the sheer tension on those ships. The expedition completely stopped acting like an exploration fleet and instantly shifted into a hardened military formation. Ships formed into tight concentric rings, heavy weapons were primed and ready, and every single available sensor was scanning the dark. But nothing appears. And honestly, that's the most terrifying part. They were braced and completely prepared for an enemy that simply refused to show itself. Finally, they actually spot something out there, but it's not ships. It's these colossal ancient structures just drifting in the void, completely unlike any known architecture. When their scholars manage to analyze the markings on the hull, they realize they're looking at a massive database, and this really brilliantly illustrates the sheer scale of the discovery. These coordinates are actually records of civilizations that had crossed the boundary before them. As you can see on the slide, most are marked extinction or silence. But the really chilling part, they found humanity's entry, and the date logged right next to it was impossible. Meaning this thing had somehow recorded humanity's presence thousands and thousands of years before this expedition ever even arrived. So what does this all actually mean? Well, the officers argued about it constantly, but then the fleet's head astropath receives a vision, and it's not from the warp but from somewhere else. He sees the Milky Way with countless civilizations expanding outward, and out beyond the galaxy, the observers, entities just waiting, not attacking, just watching. That's when the expedition finally understood. Those signals earlier, they weren't invitations, they were warnings. Every single civilization that reached the frontier was being observed. Some were allowed to continue, others simply disappeared. The real question was why? And then the ultimate answer arrived. A massive contact suddenly appeared just beyond the fleet. It was way too large to be a ship, stretching across the darkness almost like a fragment of some impossible machine. The fleet commander immediately ordered weapons lock, but the object did nothing. Instead, every single Imperial vessel received a complete unified message. It sounded completely flat, highly procedural, and absolute. "Return to your galaxy." The command wasn't even threatening, which honestly kind of made it worse. It sounded more like humanity had just unknowingly crossed a property line belonging to someone or something else. In response, the commander asked just one simple question: "Who are you?" For 17 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then the answer arrived: "The ones who remember." So the fleet opened fire. It's a decision that's still fiercely debated in the lore, but the result, undeniably catastrophic. Their weapons hit the object and simply disappeared. They were just absorbed. The object didn't even bother to shoot back. Instead, 3 Imperial ships vanished simultaneously, then 5, then 12. The entire formation completely collapsed in a blind panic as ships desperately tried to jump into the warp independently to escape. Some of them never returned at all. One actually reappeared in Imperial space decades later. Its crew had aged only a few minutes, while the ship's internal chronometers claimed that over 3 centuries had passed. When it was all said and done, only a single ship returned with its records intact. Most of the crew were already dead. When the Inquisition's interrogators demanded an explanation from the surviving captain, he reportedly delivered this incredibly chilling statement: "We were not defeated." He stopped right there. The interrogator demanded he explain himself. The captain just looked up and answered, "We were released." That one specific word, released, literally changes our entire understanding of this lore. Because think about it, if this entity could have easily annihilated them but actively chose not to, why? Think about the terrifying implication here. What if the galactic rim isn't a frontier at all? What if it's a quarantine boundary? Perhaps the galaxy isn't surrounded by empty space, but by something deliberately designed to prevent whatever lives inside from spreading outward. We always look up and ask, what is beyond the galaxy? But maybe the real question we should have been asking all along is, why has it been keeping us locked inside? Naturally, as they always do. Imperial authorities buried the whole thing. The surviving ship was immediately quarantined, all records were sealed, and the surviving officers were silenced forever. The official story they went with: a simple navigational failure. Just another forgotten tragedy in the void. But one single piece of evidence managed to escape the purge: a heavily damaged navigation file. And the crucial point here is what that file actually contained: a final coordinate. Except it wasn't out beyond the galactic rim. It was inside the Milky Way, thousands of light-years away from the expedition's original location. Something had followed them home. And that right there changes absolutely everything. Because the most frightening part of this entire story isn't that humanity found something outside the galaxy. It's that the thing outside the galaxy figured out a way inside. Remember this number. What if it never actually needed to invade? Perhaps it only needs to wait for the Imperium to become fully distracted, for humanity to completely tear itself apart. Somewhere out in the darkness, it now knows exactly where humanity lives, and somewhere deep inside Imperial space, an unidentified signal may still be repeating. 3 pulses, then silence. 3 pulses, then silence. Just waiting for an answer. You know, the Imperium has spent 10,000 years believing that the absolute greatest threats to humanity come from within the galaxy. Chaos, orcs, tyrannids, necrons. But perhaps those threats are only the wars we are actually allowed to see. Perhaps the real existential danger lies just beyond the map. So if the galactic rim is truly a boundary, who built it? And more importantly, who exactly is standing beyond it? If humanity ever crosses that boundary again, will the things waiting out there in the darkness still choose to let us return? Was the Imperium truly exploring the edge of the galaxy? Or did they accidentally knock on a door that was simply never meant to be opened?